Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something pretty interesting. We've got the lost history of the flat Earth, and we'll be kind of comparing it to the IPCC report. And you know how those two things go together? Maybe not so obvious, but
Yeah.
hopefully as we go through this, you'll see that there are some interesting connections that we can make between the two.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see how they both look at the idea of like shifts in the world, big changes, but through very, very different lenses, as we'll see.
Yeah, so like the Flat Earth source talks about this great reset that happened back in the 1800s.
Hmm.
And they're claiming it wiped out all these civilizations that had, super advanced technology based on this ether, this like energy source. And then we've got the IPCC report, which is much more grounded in, what we observe in the world, human activity and how it's affecting, climate and land use and things like that. So very different starting points.
Yeah, totally different worldviews. I mean, you got the flat Earth theory, which is relying a lot on like historical anomalies and symbolism and even, like anecdotal evidence. They point to things like all those leaning towers around the world. You know, those ones that are kind of tilted?
Yeah.
They suggest that maybe they weren't just bad architecture. Maybe they were part of like a global energy grid or something, powered by this ether.
It's like they're saying there's a secret truth hidden in history
Exactly.
about how the world really works.
Yeah, and then in contrast, you have climate science, which is grounded in, empirical data and observation and modeling and the scientific method. And the IPCC report's a good example of that. It's meticulously documented
Right.
human activities and how those activities are impacting the climate.
Yeah. So different approaches, different evidence. But it is interesting that they both deal with, transformations that are shaping the world.
Absolutely.
Just on wildly different timescales.
Right. Yeah. You've got the flat Earth theory, which is all about this sudden catastrophic great reset.
Right.
And climate science that says, no, it's a more gradual thing, but it's accelerating. And it's accelerating because of,
Right.
what we're doing as humans.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The Flat Earth source says people are hiding the truth about how the Earth really works. And they say it's all about control, like
Yeah.
controlling energy and technology.
That's interesting because there are echoes of that even in the climate change world.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's all this debate about, powerful industries, misinformation,
Yeah.
influence of money on shaping, what people think and what policies get made.
So both of them are looking at this idea of like who's in control of the story
Yeah.
and how information, especially about energy, can be really powerful.
Exactly. It raises some good questions for everyone to think about, like who benefits from shaping these stories that we hear? And how do we tell the difference between, real evidence and just speculation?
Okay, so now the Flat Earth source goes really deep into these descriptions of like ancient buildings,
Yeah.
cathedrals, arches, those towers we were talking about before. They're saying they weren't just for looks. They were part of this lost energy system, harnessing the power of ether.
It's funny because that kind of connects with an idea from climate science called geoengineering. It's like this idea that we can do things on a large scale to try to, counteract the effects of climate change. And some of the ideas even involve messing with the atmosphere, which is kind of wild.
Wait, are they saying that ancient people were already doing that? Like what scientists are just now starting to think about?
Yeah, it's a really interesting parallel. I mean, both of them are talking about the potential of humans to like really shape the world. But of course, the technologies and the reasons they're doing it are totally different.
That's a big aha moment. Both of them are saying that humans can manipulate these natural systems, but obviously they're using different technologies and they're doing it for very different reasons.
Exactly. And it brings up the question of, what's ethical? How do we balance, doing cool new things with taking care of the planet? And what about those unintended consequences? When we mess with natural systems, we don't always know what's going to happen.
This is really making me think differently about, the big picture.
That's what's so cool about looking at two different viewpoints like this. It forces you to think about things in a new way.
Now, this is interesting. They both talk about the North Pole, but for totally different reasons.
Right. The flat earthers, they put the North Pole right at the center of their world. And they even say it could be where this legendary place called Hyperborea is. They think the Earth's magnetic field is like this powerful force shaping everything, influencing energy flow, and maybe even hiding this secret realm.
They point to these old maps showing Hyperborea,
Right.
but then it's gone in later maps. It's like someone tried to erase it from history.
Interesting. Now, the IPCC report talks about the North Pole for a totally different reason, permafrost.
permafrost. That's like the frozen ground up in the Arctic that's been thawing because of, global warming.
Exactly. It's got tons of organic matter in it, and as it thaws, it releases methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, greenhouse gases.
Whoa. Yeah.
And the IPCC report says this could create a feedback loop, making climate change even worse.
So the flat earthers see the North Pole as like this mystical center point,
Mm-hmm.
and climate scientists see it as like a potential tipping point for climate change.
It's a big contrast for sure. It shows how two different perspectives can lead to completely different interpretations of the same place. But both of them highlight the importance of the polar regions and the Earth's magnetic field in, shaping the world.
It's mind-blowing to think that these places that seem so far away can have such a huge impact on the whole planet. It makes you wonder, how much do we really understand about how everything is connected?
That's a question both of them are trying to answer in their own ways.
It's fascinating how both perspectives engage with the idea of like these unseen forces shaping our world.
Yeah.
But their interpretations are so different.
Yeah, that's a big difference between them. The flat Earth theory really emphasizes hidden knowledge and these suppressed technologies. They say that ancient civilizations understood and used powerful forces like this mysterious ether, but that somehow this knowledge got lost or maybe even intentionally hidden, like maybe by people who wanted to control the world through regular energy sources.
Like they talk about those star forts all over the world. They say they weren't just for defense, they were actually giant energy generators
Right.
tapping into this ether.
It's an interesting idea, but it doesn't really have any scientific support. But this focus on hidden energies does kind of connect to something in climate science that often gets overlooked, the sheer power of solar radiation.
Yeah, the sun.
Right.
That's what powers our entire climate.
Exactly. And the IPCC report goes into great detail about how changes in solar radiation, mainly caused by humans burning fossil fuels, are messing with the balance of the Earth's atmosphere. That's what leads to the greenhouse effect and global warming. So while the flat Earth theory is focused on this hypothetical ether energy, climate science is looking at the very real impact of solar radiation on the planet.
It reminds us that we don't have to look to ancient myths or mysteries to understand the forces that shape the world.
Right.
We have science,
Right.
and that gives us a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, that's true. But there is one thing about the flat Earth theory's emphasis on control and manipulation that kind of connects to a worry that comes up a lot in climate change discussions.
You mean like the idea that powerful people are downplaying the risks of climate change or blocking any action on it because it benefits them?
Exactly. The IPCC report sticks to the scientific evidence, but it does acknowledge that it's tricky to communicate how urgent climate change is when you have powerful lobbies and special interests who want to keep things as they are.
It's that classic struggle between truth and power. How do we make sure people get accurate information about important issues like climate change without it being influenced by those in power?
It's a big question, and this deep dive really shows how important it is to be critical of the information we receive. We have to question the stories we're told and look for different perspectives.
The Flat Earth source also talks about cycles, like ages or eras. They believe that history repeats itself in these grand patterns, like humanity goes through multiple resets, periods of huge advancement followed by really bad declines, and they think we're on the edge of another big shift. They even talk about those leaning towers we talked about before, saying they're leftovers from an earlier civilization that got wiped out by a massive flood, like a real-life Atlantis.
It's a great story, but there's no scientific evidence to back it up. But this idea of cycles does connect to something in climate science called natural climate variability.
Right, like the ice ages that have come and gone over thousands of years.
Exactly. Climate science recognizes that Earth's climate has changed naturally over time because of things like solar radiation and volcanic activity and even shifts in Earth's orbit.
So both agree on cycles, but the Flat Earth theory looks at them through a more spiritual lens. And climate science focuses on natural processes that we can actually measure.
Right. And that difference is really important for how we understand what's happening to our planet today. The IPCC report makes it clear that the warming we're seeing now is happening much faster and is much more intense than anything we've seen before. And it's mainly driven by human actions, not natural cycles.
This makes me think about all the symbols and metaphors the Flat Earth source talks about. They say they hold secret knowledge about the world like a code waiting to be broken. It's kind of a rabbit hole to go down. But it does raise a question. What if there are layers of meaning and understanding that we've lost over time?
It's an interesting thought. Even if we don't agree with the flat Earth theory's interpretation, their focus on symbolism reminds us that knowledge can be lost or changed or hidden throughout history. This just reinforces why critical thinking is so important. We need to look at different perspectives and be open to changing our understanding as we learn new things.
They make a bold claim about the moon. They say it's not even a real celestial body, but some kind of projection or reflection. They even suggest the image on the moon could be a map of a hidden realm. Pretty wild theory.
Yeah, definitely imaginative, but it
Well,
goes against our scientific understanding of the moon as, a celestial body orbiting Earth.
but here's the connection I see. The IPCC report stresses how important it is to understand complex systems and how different things can affect our climate. Like they're saying that to see the big picture, we need to pay attention to how seemingly unrelated things can actually be linked in profound ways.
You've hit on a key point. The IPCC report actually explains how the moon's gravity affects tides and how its phases affect animal behavior, and even how it contributes to the Earth's tilt and the stability of our climate. So while the flat Earth theory offers a very fantastical interpretation, climate science shows the real and measurable ways the moon impacts our planet.
It's like a reminder that even things we think we understand can have these hidden layers of complexity.
Exactly. This whole deep dive is about encouraging us to think critically, to question what we think we know, and to be open to new discoveries.
The flat Earth theory is pretty bleak. They paint a picture of a world controlled by these powerful forces where a lot of our history has been fabricated or hidden. They point to all these orphanages that appeared around the world in the 19th century and say they were filled with children from the lost civilization that was wiped out by the Great Reset.
It's a disturbing story,
Wow.
and there's no historical evidence to support it, but it does raise a question that's kind of unsettling. How much control do we actually have over our own destinies?
It's a heavy question, especially when we're facing this global challenge of climate change.
It really is, and it brings up the idea of agency. If we are facing a global crisis caused by our actions, as the IPCC report clearly shows, then that means we also have the power to change things.
So it's both empowering and scary.
Exactly. The IPCC report highlights the terrible consequences of doing nothing, but it also offers a glimmer of hope.
They talk about ways to lessen the effects of climate change and how human ingenuity and collective action could help us deal with the challenges, right?
Right. It reminds us that even though we might not have total control over everything, we're not helpless. Our choices and actions really do make a difference.
This deep dive has shown me how these two ideas that seem so different, flat Earth theories and climate science, both touch on this theme of human agency in a world with forces that seem so much bigger than us. It's both fascinating and a little bit scary.
It is, and it shows how important it is to be informed and to actively participate in shaping the future, whether we're challenging the status quo or working within the systems we have to create positive change.
It's wild how these two perspectives, one based on speculation and the other on scientific evidence, can still connect in these unexpected ways.
It really shows the power of ideas. Even ones that might seem out there can make you curious and think more deeply about the world.
Okay, so we've talked about hidden knowledge, ancient technologies, those leaning towers. But the flat Earth source also claims that these old civilizations knew something we've forgotten: how to live in harmony with nature. They say they used natural energies, lived sustainably, and really respected the planet. It sounds amazing, but is there any truth to it?
Well, there's no scientific proof to back up their claims about these ancient civilizations, but their focus on harmony with nature does connect with an important idea from the IPCC report: the concept of planetary boundaries.
Planetary boundaries, what are those?
Basically, they're the limits within which humans can operate without causing permanent damage to the Earth's systems. The IPCC report warns that we're pushing past these boundaries in things like climate change, loss of biodiversity, and nitrogen pollution. We're pushing the planet towards tipping points that could be disastrous.
So the flat Earth theory romanticizes this past where humans lived in balance with nature. And climate science is telling us, hey, we've messed up and need to change course before it's too late.
Exactly. It's a reminder that our actions have consequences. We need to find ways to live within the limits of our planet if we want a future.
This reminds me of all the claims about hidden knowledge and suppressed information. The flat Earth source says we're being lied to about the true nature of the world, that certain people in power benefit from keeping us in the dark.
It's a similar idea to what we see in discussions about climate change. There are concerns about misinformation campaigns, about powerful groups downplaying the risks, and about the influence of money on what decisions are made.
It's like that saying, follow the money, right? Who benefits from keeping people in the dark about these important issues?
Right. This deep dive shows us how important it is to be careful about the information we take in, to question the stories we're told, and to look for different perspectives. We need to learn how to think critically about information, especially in a world full of so much data and conflicting claims.
The flat earth theory uses scale and perspective a lot to make their points. They'll say, if you zoom out far enough, the earth looks flat. Or they'll say, we can't see the curve of the earth from where we stand.
It's an interesting way to use selective perspectives to create an illusion. Even though their conclusions are wrong, their emphasis on scale and perspective does relate to the climate change conversation.
Oh, really? How so?
Climate change is complex. It shows up differently depending on the scale you're looking at. The IPCC report says it's important to understand these different scales, from individual choices and actions all the way up to global systems and trends. It's about realizing that things that might seem small can have huge consequences when you multiply them across billions of people and long periods of time.
So just like zooming out too far can distort the shape of the earth, focusing too much on individual actions can hide the bigger systemic problems causing climate change.
Exactly. This deep dive reminds us that to really understand something complex like climate change, we need to consider different perspectives and different scales. That's how we can come up with good solutions.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot comparing flat earth theories with climate science. It's been quite a journey. What's the main takeaway? What's that big aha moment?
I think the big takeaway is how important critical thinking, curiosity, and open-mindedness are. Whether we're exploring fringe theories or established science, we should always be willing to question what we think we know, challenge the stories we're told, and seek out different viewpoints.
It's about being informed, but not blindly accepting everything. Being skeptical, but not cynical.
Yeah.
And always trying to learn and grow.
Exactly. It's about understanding that even ideas that seem strange can sometimes lead to thought-provoking questions and a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
This deep dive has definitely broadened my horizons and given me a lot to think about. Thanks for taking us through this interesting exploration.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the journey of discovery never really ends. There's always more to explore, more to learn, and more to question.